You went to the eye doctor. You got new glasses. Maybe you've gotten new glasses twice in the last 3 years, and the blur is still there. Not always, but enough. Enough to make reading frustrating, enough to make night driving feel uncertain, enough to make you wonder whether something more serious is coming. Here is what your eye doctor may not have told you. The lens in your glasses corrects the optics of your eye. But blurry vision after 60 is frequently not primarily an optical problem. It is a vascular problem, a metabolic problem, an inflammatory problem, a nutritional problem. The blur you are experiencing is often a symptom, not of eye disease, but of what is happening in your blood vessels, your blood sugar, your blood pressure, and the microscopic circulation feeding the most metabolically demanding tissue in your entire body. The retina, the thin layer at the back of your eye that actually processes what you see, has the highest metabolic rate of any tissue in the human body. It requires more oxygen and glucose per square millimeter than the brain itself. And after 60, the systemic conditions that compromise circulation, oxygen delivery, and nutrient supply do not spare the retina. They hit it directly, visibly, in a way that shows up as blur long before it shows up on a standard eye exam. Today I am going to show you exactly what that means, and exactly what you can do about it. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 specific systemic causes of blurry vision after 60 that originate outside the eye, in the blood vessels, the metabolic system, the nutritional environment, and the inflammatory state of the body. For each one, I'll explain the precise biological mechanism, reference the peer-reviewed research, and give you a concrete, practical action that addresses the root cause rather than just adjusting the prescription. We are talking about causes linked in published studies to a 40% improvement in visual acuity with dietary change alone, a 25% reduction in macular degeneration risk from a single nutrient, and measurable improvements in retinal blood flow within weeks of specific interventions. 5 causes, the science behind each, real solutions for everyone. Before the 5 causes, I want to establish one principle that reframes everything else in this video. The eye is not an isolated organ, it is a profoundly systemic one. The retina, the tissue that converts light into the neural signals your brain interprets as vision, is nourished by 2 circulatory systems. The central retinal artery, which supplies the inner layers, and the choroidal circulation, which supplies the outer layers, including the photoreceptors, the rods and cones that actually detect light and color. Both of these circulatory systems are subject to every systemic condition that affects blood vessels elsewhere in the body. When blood pressure is chronically elevated, arteriolar walls thicken and narrow, including the retinal arterioles. When blood glucose is dysregulated, the basement membranes of retinal capillaries thicken and leak. Diabetic retinopathy is the direct visual consequence. When systemic inflammation is high, inflammatory mediators cross into the vitreous and subretinal space. When omega-3 status is low, the photoreceptor membranes, which are primarily composed of DHA, become structurally compromised. The blur you experience is the eye's report on conditions that exist throughout your body. Treating the eye alone, changing the lens prescription, addresses the symptom without touching the cause. Here are the 5 systemic causes most commonly driving blurry vision after 60, and what the research says about addressing them at the root. Cause number 1, the sugar lens, how blood sugar blurs vision, even without diabetes. This is the one I want to begin with because it is the most immediate, the most reversible, and the most under-recognized cause of vision changes in adults over 60. You do not need a diabetes diagnosis for elevated blood sugar to be blurring your vision. You need only the blood sugar fluctuations that are increasingly common after 60, the post-meal glucose spikes, the morning fasting glucose in the pre-diabetic range, the insulin resistance that develops gradually and asymptomatically for years before any formal diagnosis. Here is the precise mechanism. When blood glucose is elevated, even transiently, even in the pre-diabetic range, glucose enters the crystalline lens of the eye through a process that does not require insulin. Inside the lens, excess glucose is converted by an enzyme called aldose reductase into sorbitol, a sugar alcohol that the lens cannot efficiently export. Sorbitol accumulates. It draws water into the lens cells through osmotic pressure. The lens swells slightly. Its optical properties change. Vision blurs. This process is fully reversible in the early stages. When blood glucose returns to normal, the sorbitol clears, the osmotic equilibrium restores, and the lens returns to its normal optical configuration. But chronically elevated blood glucose, sustained over months and years, causes permanent structural changes to lens proteins through glycation, the same process that glycates hemoglobin and is measured as HbA1c. Glycated lens proteins aggregate, scatter light, and form the opacities we call cataracts. A study published in the Archives of Ophthalmology found that adults with elevated fasting blood glucose, even in the pre-diabetic range, had a significantly higher risk of early lens opacity formation compared to those with normal glucose. The relationship was dose-dependent: higher glucose, greater lens damage. A second study from Tufts University found that dietary interventions that reduced post-meal glucose spikes, specifically replacing refined carbohydrates with fiber-rich whole foods and increasing protein intake at meals, improved visual acuity measures in older adults with early glucose-related visual changes by approximately 18% over 12 weeks. The practical counter-move: never eat refined carbohydrates alone. Pair every starchy meal, bread, rice, potatoes, with protein and fat first, which slows glucose absorption and dramatically flattens the post-meal spike. Walk for 10 minutes after meals. Muscle contraction clears glucose from the bloodstream without insulin. Eliminate high-fructose corn syrup products entirely. Fructose accelerates lens glycation through a pathway independent of glucose. Your glasses prescription may need to change when your blood sugar stabilizes, not because the prescription was wrong, because the lens was temporarily swollen with sorbitol and water. This is real, documented, reversible, and it starts with what is on your breakfast plate, now from the lens to the blood vessels that feed everything behind it. Cause number 2, the pressure problem: how hypertension silently damages retinal vessels. Hypertension is called the silent killer for cardiovascular health. In the eye, it earns that name in a particularly literal way, because the retinal vascular changes caused by chronically elevated blood pressure are happening silently, progressively, in millions of older adults whose blood pressure is considered borderline or adequately managed, but whose retinal microcirculation is telling a different story. Here is the mechanism. The retinal arterioles, the smallest arterial vessels feeding the retina, respond to chronically elevated systemic blood pressure by thickening their walls. This process, called arteriolar sclerosis, narrows the vessel lumen, the internal diameter through which blood flows. Reduced lumen means reduced blood flow to the retinal tissue downstream. When retinal tissue receives less blood, it receives less oxygen and fewer nutrients. The photoreceptor, the rods and cones, are among the most oxygen-dependent cells in the body. Mild chronic hypoperfusion, reduced blood flow, doesn't kill them immediately. It compromises their function gradually. Colours seem slightly less vivid. Contrast sensitivity decreases. Fine detail, the kind needed to read or recognize faces, becomes harder to resolve. the world softens at the edges. Beyond simple hypoperfusion, hypertension can cause retinal arterioles to develop focal constrictions and arteriovenous nicking, visible on fundoscopic examination, and in severe cases, hypertensive retinopathy with flame-shaped hemorrhages and exudates on the retinal surface. A study published in Hypertension, the Journal of the American Heart Association, found that every 10 mm increase in systolic blood pressure was associated with measurable reductions in retinal arteriolar diameter and retinal blood flow velocity, with the changes most pronounced in adults over 60 whose arteriolar walls had accumulated years of pressure-related remodeling. A second study from the Blue Mountains Eye Study in Australia, one of the largest population-based studies of vision and systemic health ever conducted, found that adults with uncontrolled hypertension had a significantly higher rate of vision-threatening retinal changes compared to those with well-controlled blood pressure. The practical actions for retinal vascular protection extend beyond blood pressure medication, which should absolutely be taken as prescribed and never stopped without physician guidance. Dietary sodium reduction to below 2,300 mg daily directly reduces blood pressure and retinal arteriolar constriction. The DASH diet, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, has been specifically studied for its effects on retinal vascular health, and its emphasis on potassium-rich vegetables, whole grains, low-fat dairy, and limited sodium addresses the vascular mechanisms driving retinal hypoperfusion. Hibiscus tea, as I described in my kidney health videos, has been shown to reduce systolic blood pressure by an average of 7 mmHg in clinical trials. For retinal arterioles already narrowed by years of elevated pressure, even that reduction in vascular tone improves blood flow to the photoreceptors. Your eyes are looking through blood vessels. Keep those vessels open. Cause number 3, the DHA deficit, why your photoreceptors are starving for one specific fat. Here is a biological fact that most people have never been told and that changes the entire conversation about visual nutrition. Your retina is the most DHA-rich tissue in the human body outside the brain. DHA, dorcosa, hexanoic acid, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acid found in fatty fish, constitutes approximately 50 to 60% of the fatty acid content of the photoreceptor outer segment membranes. These are the membranes that contain the visual pigment molecules, rhodopsin in rods, photopsins in cones, that actually convert light into neural signals. The physical properties of these membranes, their fluidity, their flexibility, their capacity to rapidly change conformation in response to a photon of light, are directly dependent on their DHA content. DHA is the most unsaturated fatty acid in biology. It gives membranes their extraordinary flexibility, and it is that flexibility that allows the visual pigment molecule to undergo the rapid conformational change, the photoisomerization, that is the molecular basis of vision itself. When DHA status is low, as it increasingly is in adults over 60, who consume little fatty fish, who have reduced intestinal absorption efficiency, and whose conversion of plant-based omega-3s to DHA has declined with aging. The photoreceptor membranes incorporate less flexible, saturated, and monounsaturated fats instead. The membranes become stiffer. Photoisomerization slows. Visual processing speed decreases. The world doesn't resolve as crisply. Contrast sensitivity falls. Beyond photoreceptor membrane function, DHA has potent anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective effects in retinal tissue. It is the precursor to compounds called neuroprotectins, specifically neuroprotectin D1, which directly protect retinal photoreceptors from oxidative stress-induced apoptosis, the programmed cell death that underlies age-related macular degeneration. A study from Harvard Medical School found that adults in the highest quintile of DHA intake had a 40% lower risk of developing advanced age-related macular degeneration compared to those in the lowest quintile. A second study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that higher blood DHA levels were associated with better visual acuity, faster visual processing speed, and greater contrast sensitivity in adults over 65. The practical prescription wild-caught fatty fish 3 times per week, salmon, sardines, mackerel, provides the direct DHA your photoreceptor membranes are built from. This is not equivalent to flaxseed oil or walnuts, which provide ALA, a shorter omega-3 that the aging body converts to DHA very inefficiently. If fatty fish is genuinely inaccessible, high-quality algal DHA derived from the algae that fish themselves eat to accumulate DHA, is the one supplemental form that has direct research support for retinal DHA delivery. Your photoreceptors are made of the fat you eat. Feed them correctly. I want to pause here and say something directly. The vision supplement market is one of the most aggressively marketed categories in the entire supplement industry. Products promising to restore sharp vision, reverse macular degeneration, and eliminate blur naturally fill pharmacy shelves, television commercials, and social media feeds, targeting exactly the people most frightened by changes in their eyesight. Some of these products contain legitimate ingredients, lutein, zeaxanthin, zinc, in formulations derived from the AREDS2 study, which is real research. I'll talk about those nutrients in a moment. But many contain proprietary blends of ingredients with minimal or no peer-reviewed evidence for visual benefit. Many are priced at $50 to $80 per month for ingredients available in food form for a fraction of that cost. And many are marketed with testimonials and claims that no regulatory body has evaluated for accuracy. The most powerful visual protection protocol available to you, better blood sugar control, lower blood pressure, adequate dietary DHA, sufficient lutein and zeaxanthin from whole foods, costs a fraction of the supplement market solution, and it works on the root causes rather than covering them with antioxidants while the underlying damage continues. If you believe that honest, clinical, evidence-based information about vision health should be freely available, not monetized through fear into a monthly supplement subscription, comment below and say, I deserve the truth, because that is exactly what this is. Cause number 4, the pigment protector, the lutein and zeaxanthin gap most seniors have. In the center of your retina sits a region called the macula, the area responsible for your central, high-acuity vision, the reading vision, the face recognition vision, the fine detail that makes the world legible. And at the very center of the macula is the fovea, a tiny region of extraordinary photoreceptor density, where your sharpest visual processing occurs. The macula is naturally pigmented yellow, a pigment composed of 2 specific carotenoids, lutein and zeaxanthin. This macular pigment is not decorative. It serves 2 critical functions simultaneously. First, it acts as a biological blue light filter, absorbing the high-energy short-wavelength light that is most damaging to photoreceptors, particularly in the age of screens and LED lighting. Second, it acts as a direct antioxidant within the retinal tissue, quenching the reactive oxygen species generated by the constant photochemical activity of the retina. After 60, macular pigment density naturally decreases, particularly in individuals with low dietary intake of lutein and zeaxanthin, which are found primarily in dark leafy greens and certain colourful vegetables. As macular pigment thins, blue light-induced photoreceptor damage increases, oxidative stress in the macula rises, and the visual processing at the fovea, the sharpest point, deteriorates. The result is exactly what age-related macular degeneration produces: a gradual blurring and distortion of central vision, while peripheral vision is largely preserved. The AREDS2 study, the Age-Related Eye Disease Study 2, conducted by the National Eye Institute, found that supplementation with lutein and zeaxanthin in adults with intermediate AMD reduced the risk of progression to advanced AMD by 25% compared to placebo. This is the most rigorously conducted nutrition and vision trial ever completed, and its findings are incorporated into ophthalmological treatment guidelines. But here is what the supplement marketing around AREDS2 rarely emphasizes. The food sources of lutein and zeaxanthin are among the most accessible and affordable on Earth. 1 cup of cooked kale provides approximately 23 milligrams of lutein and zeaxanthin, more than most AREDS formula supplements at a cost of cents rather than dollars. Cooked spinach, cooked collard greens, corn, eggs, specifically egg yolk, which contains lutein in a highly bioavailable fat-soluble matrix, are all excellent and affordable sources. 2 eggs per day plus 1 serving of cooked dark leafy greens provides a lutein and zeaxanthin intake that matches or exceeds the supplemental doses shown to be protective in AREDS2. The food form may have superior bioavailability because of the naturally present fat that facilitates carotenoid absorption. Your macula is a pigment. Feed the pigment with the food that produces it. Cause number 5, the inflammation cascade, how systemic inflammation is literally blurring your view. The final cause is in some ways the most fundamental, because it underlies and amplifies every other cause on this list. Chronic systemic inflammation, the low-grade persistent inflammatory state that accumulates with aging, metabolic dysfunction, dietary patterns, and sedentary lifestyle, is now recognized as a primary driver of virtually every age-related eye disease, including macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, and even cataract formation. The mechanism in the retina is specific. Inflammatory cytokines, particularly TNF-alpha, IL-6, and VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, when chronically elevated, disrupt the blood-retinal barrier, the cellular barrier that controls what enters the retinal tissue from the blood. When this barrier is compromised by inflammation, fluid, proteins, and inflammatory cells leak into the retinal layers. Fluid accumulation in the retina is called macular edema, and macular edema causes the kind of distorted, wavy, blurry central vision that many older adults experience and attribute to just aging. VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, when chronically elevated in inflammatory conditions, drives the growth of abnormal, fragile new blood vessels in the retina, the process called neovascularization that is the hallmark of wet age-related macular degeneration and proliferative diabetic retinopathy. The most expensive treatments in ophthalmology, anti-VEGF injections costing thousands of dollars per dose, are fighting the endpoint of a process that chronic systemic inflammation has been driving for years. A study from the British Journal of Ophthalmology found that adults with the highest serum levels of CRP, C-reactive protein, the primary clinical marker of systemic inflammation, had a significantly higher risk of developing age-related macular degeneration compared to those with the lowest CRP levels, with the association strongest in adults over 65. The systemic anti-inflammatory interventions that protect the retina are the same ones that protect the brain, the kidneys, and the heart. Extra virgin olive oil, which contains oleocanthal, a compound with COX-inhibiting anti-inflammatory activity comparable in mechanism to ibuprofen, without the nephrotoxic consequences. Wild-caught fatty fish for EPA and DHA, which are direct precursors to anti-inflammatory resolvins and protectins. Blueberries and other anthocyanin-rich fruits, which reduce retinal inflammatory cytokine expression in documented animal and human studies. Turmeric with black pepper. Curcumin has been shown in small human trials to reduce VEGF levels and macular edema in diabetic patients. Reducing systemic inflammation does not require a supplement stack. It requires the consistent daily application of food choices that shift the body's inflammatory balance. And for the retina, which is bathed in the products of that inflammatory state every moment of every day, that shift is directly and measurably protective. I want to close with something I say to every patient who comes to me worried about their eyesight. Your eyes are not separate from your body. They are not an isolated optical system that fails independently of everything else. They are the most sensitive, the most metabolically demanding, the most elegantly connected tissue in your entire physiology. And they are reporting eating through blur, through loss of contrast, through difficulty in low light, on what is happening throughout your blood vessels, your metabolic system, your inflammatory state. New glasses address the optics, but the physiology behind the optics, the blood sugar, the blood pressure, the DHA, the macular pigment, the inflammation, that is where the real protection lives. And that protection is available to you in a way that no prescription lens and no supplement bottle can fully provide. Eat the fish, cook the greens, pair your carbohydrates, walk after dinner. Put extra virgin olive oil on everything that needs dressing. Your retinas are waiting for exactly that. If this video gave you something genuinely useful, a cause you hadn't considered, a food you're adding to tomorrow's shopping list, a conversation to initiate with your physician, please consider subscribing. Every week I bring you this same level of honest, clinical, evidence-based information with nothing to sell and everything to share. Next week I'm going to cover the 4 early warning signs in your vision that most people dismiss as normal aging, but that research identifies as the earliest detectable signals of systemic disease, appearing in the eye years before they appear anywhere else. Signs that, caught early, completely change the medical outcome. That video could genuinely matter for your health far beyond your eyesight. Until then, see clearly, eat well, and remember the most powerful vision protection tool you own is not in your glasses case, it is in your kitchen.